So let's start with the good king. Okay, so the good king we're going to talk about tonight is King Hezekiah. Have you heard of this guy? King Hezekiah. Those of you who are reading through the Bible with me this year, we read about him about a month and a half ago. Okay, so King Hezekiah was a king, an Israelite king, and he reigned over Judah from 715 to 686 BC. So that is King Hezekiah. Move this. There we go. Okay. And so he ruled over Judah. Okay, so during this time in Israel's history, Israel was completely divided into two different kingdoms. Okay, so you had the northern kingdom, which was called Israel. Okay, and that was to the north. And then you had the southern kingdom, which was called Judah, and that included the city of Jerusalem. Okay, and so during this time, these two kingdoms of Israel were completely divided. They were hostile to each other. In fact, right before our story begins, that I'm going to tell tonight, the two different kingdoms of Israel were actually fighting against each other. They were killing each other. They were taking each other as prisoners of war. I mean, that must have just been so heart-wrenching to God that this was happening, this division of his chosen people. But that's what was happening. So at this time, Israel was completely divided, two completely hostile, separate kingdoms at this time. And then right before our story begins tonight, the northern kingdom of Israel had been besieged by the Assyrians, and they had been defeated by the Assyrians and taken captive. A lot of the Israelites from the northern kingdom had been taken as prisoners and gone into exile to Assyria. And so at this time, at the beginning of King Hezekiah's reign over Judah, there wasn't even a northern kingdom. It was completely gone. At this time, there was only Judah. And remember, that includes the city of Jerusalem. And so that's where we begin with King Hezekiah, who was the king over Judah at this time. Now, King Hezekiah was a good king. So if you remember the Old Testament, you have learned that there was a succession of kings over Israel and then over Israel and Judah when they were split. And a lot of those kings were really bad. They were really evil kings who did terrible things like child sacrifice and idolatry and other atrocities. They oppressed their own people. So a lot of those kings were really bad. King Hezekiah's father was one of the bad kings. His name was Ahaz. But King Hezekiah was one of the good kings. So he had a heart for God. So he was a very good king. And here's what we learn about him in 2 Kings. Now, it came about in the third year of Hoshea, the son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, became king. Okay, so right when Hezekiah became king, the northern kingdom had not yet been defeated by the Assyrians. And so this was the king that they had, Hoshea. So Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became king. He reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah, and Zechariah was the high priest of the true God, of the Hebrew God. Okay, so Hezekiah's grandfather was a priest of the Lord. That is probably where Hezekiah learned everything that he did to have a heart for the Lord. So Hezekiah did what was right in the sight of the Lord, in accordance with everything that his father David had done. Okay, so when they say Father David, obviously his father was Ahaz, not really David. David was actually Hezekiah's great grandfather. So 11 greats. But he was in the Davidic line. Okay. So Hezekiah removed the high places and smashed the memorial stones to pieces. He cut down the Asherah. Okay. So he was getting rid of all the idols that were throughout Judah. He also crushed to pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days, the son of Israel had been burning incense to it, and it was called Nehushtan. Can you believe that? Okay, so you remember the story in the Old Testament when the Israelites had sinned against God, and so all of these fiery serpents came, and they were biting the Israelites and killing them. And then God told Moses to make this bronze serpent statue and put it up on a pole. And if anybody looked at that statue, they would be healed. So when he made this, God had told him to make this bronze serpent. It was a good thing. It was for healing. And so the Israelites had turned it around and they were worshiping it. They turned it into an idol. The Israelites would take anything and turn it into an idol, very much like a lot of people today. Okay, so that is one of the reasons why he was considered a very, very good king because he did all of this, and he brought the people of Israel back to the Lord. Okay, so Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, and after him there was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, nor among those who came before him. For he clung to the Lord. He did not desist from following him, but kept his commandments, which the Lord had commanded Moses, and the Lord was with him. Wherever he went, he was successful. So what a wonderful, glowing report. Hezekiah was a very good king. All right, so now let's talk about the bad king. Here is the bad king. This guy's name is Sennacherib, and he was the Assyrian king, and he reigned over Assyria from 705 to 681 BC. So Sennacherib and Hezekiah were kings at the same time. All right. So we actually know a lot about King Sennacherib, and we know a lot about Hezekiah as well, and not just from the Bible. There are a lot of extra biblical historic sources from this particular time period, which is really awesome. So in particular, there are extensive Assyrian inscriptions. So at this time in history, the Assyrians, they had a very good system of writing. It was like cuneiform that they would put on tablets, and they would keep track of their history. And so we found a lot of those, and so we have a lot of documentation, extra biblical historical accounts during this time period when Sennacherib and Hezekiah were both kings. So that is wonderful. And everything that we have found of these inscriptions, of these Assyrian inscriptions, they back up the stories that we are told in the Bible. All right, so King Sennacherib, he ran his kingdom from the city of Nineveh. So if that sounds familiar, Nineveh, it's because that is the city where Jonah the prophet, the book Jonah in the Bible, God told Jonah the prophet to go to the city of Nineveh. It was a pagan city, and to prophesy to them that God was going to destroy them because of their sinfulness. Okay. And Jonah said, you know the story. Jonah said, no way, God. And then he ran. And then he was on a boat, and the boat was in the storm. He got thrown overboard, and a whale or a big fish swallowed him up. And then 3 days later, spit him out. And then after all of that happened, Jonah said, okay, God, I'll do what you told me to do. And so Jonah went to Nineveh, and he prophesied and said, the Lord God is going to destroy you guys because you're so sinful. And then we learn in the book of Jonah that everybody in the entire city of Nineveh, including the king, they all repented, which is absolutely miraculous and unheard of, because God sent these prophets all throughout, the Old Testament. Almost never did people listen to what they said. So this was amazing. In one sense, Jonah was one of the most successful prophets in the whole Old Testament, which is pretty crazy because he had a lot of faults. So, but anyway, so that is what we're told in the book of Jonah. So this guy, Sennacherib, is probably the great grandson of the king who was king in Nineveh when Jonah was there. Okay, so what that means is King Sennacherib's, his great grandfather probably followed the Lord, the Hebrew God. Okay, so that's really cool. But however, this guy, Sennacherib, he absolutely was a pagan king. He did not follow the Hebrew God at all. He was a very evil king. He worshipped many, many gods, including Ishtar, Asher, Nisroch, many, many others. He was a very, very evil dude. And so I don't know what happened between his great-grandfather and him, but he did not follow in the footsteps of his great-grandfather. So that is King Sennacherib, and he was the Assyrian king during the time of Hezekiah.